All right, everyone, welcome. My name's Amanda Demmer. I'm the Program Coordinator for Community-Based Research Canada, and I'm the moderator for today's session. Today is the second session in a new e-learning series called Moving the Dial, where we highlight research that has moved the dial or made advances in different social issues. Today, we have Dr. Judah Gutbrlet, who's presenting on a project that has moved the dial on social inclusion and rights of an often marginalized group that can play an essential role in waste governance, waste pickers. I also have with me today Julia Coburn, who's our Secretariat Coordinator for CBRCanada, and will be here supporting you all in the chat and with any technological issues you might have. So this presentation is brought to you by CBRCanada. The CBRCanada Secretariat is situated on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We are a membership-based organization whose mission is to advance community-based research excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, building capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing community-based research among individuals, communities, and institutions. We are a social enterprise funded entirely by our membership base of over 50 institutional members. And as part of our programs delivered to our members, we host events like today's e-learning series, as well as bi-monthly community of practice events. You can find information on our upcoming events, as well as past events and recordings and resources on our website. And Julia is going to share the link to our website in the chat with you now. In the spirit of reconciliation, we open each e-learning event by reflecting on and amplifying the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. This month, since we're discussing rights and social inclusion, we're highlighting call to action number 13. We call upon the federal government to acknowledge that Aboriginal rights include Aboriginal language rights. CBRCanada is committed to continual reflection on the interconnections between truth and reconciliation and the various topics we approach using community-based research. And we're committed to engaging with and learning from diverse Indigenous peoples across Canada. So here's our agenda for today. We'll get started with the webinar. So there will be a presentation, of course, by Judah, as well as a question and answer period. And then we'll move into the very exciting live discussion portion. The live discussion is where we all get a chance to kind of turn on our cameras, unmute ourselves and chat and discuss. We have three topics, three questions that Judah has posed for us to discuss based on some of the information in her webinar. So we highly encourage everyone to stick around for the live discussion if you're able to stay the full 2 hours. That's where a lot of really interesting co-learning and co-creation and sharing happens. A link to this agenda will be shared in the chat with you. And just some final housekeeping items. During the webinar portion, please stay muted. Feel free to keep your cameras off. The question and answer period, we will be reading the questions that come in through the chat to Judah to answer. So if you have questions that come up at any time during the webinar, feel free to just post them in the chat. And then when we get to the question and answer, I'll start by looking through any questions that have been posted throughout. So I'm honored to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Judah Gutbrlet. Judah received a PhD from the University of Tübingen, hopefully I pronounced that right, in Germany, and has held an appointment in the geography department at the University of Victoria since 2001. Judah created the Community-Based Research Laboratory in 2006, a research hub for academics and practitioners focused on participatory, community-engaged research and outreach. She brings an intersectional socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental perspective to participatory action research. For over 15 years, her research has focused on waste and discard studies and involves long-term partnerships with waste picker organizations, social movements, and practitioners. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Judah.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you, Julia, for organizing this seminar. I'm really very happy to be able to speak to all of you here. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, for whatever time zone you're zooming in. So I would like to speak today about focusing on the broad topic of waste picker rights and social inclusion, through some of the learnings over the last years through the project Mapping Waste Governance. And so I will give you a little bit of the research context, some of the methodologies and the theoretical framework which supports our work. Then we move on to the tangible outcomes, and that will be specifically the latest outcome or the latest work we're doing is related to setting up a university for waste pickers. And the next slide, please. So the overarching umbrella project, which hosts a lot of our recent research activities, is the Mapping Waste Governance project, which is a project which involves partners in many different countries of the world, in Africa, in South America, Central America, and also partners in Sweden and UVic in Canada as well. And it's funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council. And we're very closely collaborating also with the project Recycling Network, which is funded by the Swedish Research Council. The next project, the next page, please. So our research context in the Mapping Waste Governance is to look at waste management initiatives and the arrangements behind and policies involved. And thus, we're also very interested in the innovations which derive out of these grassroots organizations. And we're studying in different parts of the world, in Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania, in South America, Argentina, Brazil, and Central America, Nicaragua. And we're also looking at some case studies in Canada. And our research question, they involve around processes, challenges, and opportunities, looking at assets and barriers related to everyday waste governance projects and initiatives throughout those geographic contexts. And we're very interested in learning about the challenges and how to overcome those challenges related to making waste governance more sustainable. And that, of course, means to also make it more inclusive. There are many, many opportunities as well, and we can learn from existing experiences. And that's what we focus on in identifying and looking at those experiences and grassroots innovations. Next. So the research steps, the project started in 2018. And we started with the implementation of a survey. So that was before COVID. So we could go to the field, we could collect data. And but then during COVID, we had to adapt the project to do only online work. But it was possible because we had already established good relations in the field, specifically in Brazil, where my work is focused. So we did do some research, but more specific, related actually to COVID impacts and adaptation. Then after that, when COVID was lifted or the restrictions were lifted, we went back to the field and could do some work with video, and also work on the policy briefs and start focusing also on knowledge mobilization and publishing. And also just to mention, we have been organizing conferences in the realm of discard studies. Our last conference was online, but the next one this year, it's going to happen in Lancaster. So you're most welcome to participate, to join us there. Next page. Yeah, so our methodologies are community-based and participatory, and often also action-oriented, like looking at bottlenecks and issues and challenges and trying to collectively finding answers and or better ways of strategies to overcome these bottlenecks. So we, over those years, we have worked with case studies. We did case studies, usually 1 to 2 per country, those countries which I mentioned. Then we also did key informant interviews, and of course the survey, which I already mentioned. We also conducted participatory photo voice training in Kisumu. And of course, we're working lately also with films on grassroots innovations. And more locally, like in Brazil, throughout those years, we have temporarily and continuously held workshops focused on specific topics and specific demands which came out of the research. Next, please. So still our methodology, as I said, it's like really grounded in community, very participatory, starting out with laying the foundation by getting to know our partners and including more partners. Because in the case of Brazil, we have been working with several of these partners, waste picker organizations for several years already, even before starting the Mapping Waste Governance project. But there's always an expansion and bringing in new partners, etc., and learning through them about their assumptions about the research and learning and identifying the specific contexts these partners are working in. And then like planning the research, what are the expected outcomes from the research, also defined and designed together with the research participants. And then the next phase is the information gathering, like through the survey or holding workshops and doing the photo voice or video filming, documenting, etc. And also workshops to validate the findings, to discuss with the partners the outcomes. And then that actually then brings also some outcomes in terms of our products, publications, videos, policy briefs, folders, flyers, and other material. So really focusing on this participatory cycle or spiral, which then brings up new issues, new demands, and you start the cycle again with planning, information gathering, and working on the findings through appropriate actions. Next, please. So our theoretical framework encompasses, of course, a participatory epistemology. We're valuing the co-generation of knowledge, and our ontology is very much based on critical social theory within discard studies and also waste studies. And as you can see in those overlapping circles, I think that's kind of those overlaps that we're most interested in terms of the social solidarity economy, overlapping with the social movements and social learning, but also in the realm of solid waste governance. And the key actors in the research are the waste pickers. They are the focus, the key focus, but also particularly in the African context, waste workers are playing a crucial role in keeping particularly informal neighborhoods clean and more healthy. This work, of course, also overlaps with government as key actors, community in itself, and also particularly through the circular economy industry. Industry is involved, the recycling industry in particular. Thank you. The next. So for those who do not know the realm of waste pickers, I've prepared a couple of slides just to show you about the work they are doing, but also highlighting that this kind of work is done almost everywhere. Like the top left picture, you see these are what we call in Canada the binners. They also collect bottles and cans and return them for deposit. And their livelihoods to a certain degree also depends on that activity. Then other pictures, like the top right picture, shows a couple in Buenos Aires. They have adapted that card to collect particularly cardboard and other material in downtown Buenos Aires, where that picture was taken. The bottom left picture was taken in Tanzania in Dar es Salaam at the landfill, where many waste pickers work under very difficult and risky conditions, salvaging material before it gets buried and bringing it back to life into the circular economy. And on the right bottom picture, you see UNICATA from a cooperative in Santana de Parnaíba here in Brazil. And it's a good example showing the level of organization and efficiency cooperatives can get in their work and in constantly working and developing further and getting more, improving their work. Next, please. So here you can see that, of course, work environment changes, and you have very basic situations like this cooperative in Diadema, where the people, the workers, they work off this table, while others, as you saw before, they work on a moving belt and have much more equipment. But all of them actually do an amazing work in rescuing those materials. And if we look at the next picture, we will see the variety. Yeah, the next, please. We can see the variety of different materials they sort to and then direct it to the specific industry. So much more stuff gets recycled and recovered than, for example, in our blue bin in Canada. Next picture. Yeah, so some tangible outcomes I would like to share with you is from the Mapping Waste Governance project and the Recycling Network. Together, we have looked at the grassroots waste picker organizations in terms of their level of organization, governance, but also gender roles. And if you're more interested in that topic, you can read more in depth in this paper here. And I have prepared a couple of insights which I would like to share with you here as well in the next slide. So here we're looking at those 5 countries, and which allows us to make some really interesting comparison. For example, if you just look, I just want to point out here that the difference in terms of level of organization and type of organization. So if you look at in Latin America, the cooperatives and associations are most of the waste picker organizations, the key organizations, while in the African context, you find much more like self-help group, community-based organizations, or even small-scale enterprises, waste enterprises. Next slide. Yeah, here also, again, just to highlight that women play a key role in that sector. Throughout the different countries, women are taking a leadership role as well, but particular if you see Kenya and Tanzania, the blue line shows female chairpersons, like really, and the red is female leaders. So really women are taking the leadership in those waste recovering processes and in those organizations. Next slide. And yeah, I've included that slide just to show in terms of what kind of work they do and where the waste pickers collect material, what are their clients, where they get the material from. And you see different, there's different clients from households, large industries, schools, shops, but also sometimes related to government offices. In Brazil, for example, there is a law which dedicates all waste generated in government offices towards waste picker organizations. The next, please. And here, of course, I cannot, in the limited time I have, I cannot go through all these challenges as they are perceived by the waste picker organizations as a result from the interviews and the survey. You can see that they are multifarious, and it's very important to look at these issues. For example, if we just zoom into the social aspects, like the insufficient inclusion of women is still an issue, although many of the waste picker organizations are led by women, but it's hard work for women to be accepted in general. And then also there are issues of conflicts and alcoholism, also because those organizations, they do an important work of recovering the citizenship of many people which otherwise fall through the cracks. So people who are long-term unemployed, who are dependent, drugs or alcohol, etc., often they find a home in waste picker organizations, and they themselves call it that they are recovered. They are back to life. They get a normal life. They with the income, then they can have a home and etc. So it's also an opportunity to provide social inclusion and social development. The next one, please. Yeah, and many of those findings, of course, we want to communicate that to the policymakers, to make a difference, to support these workers, to tackle the marginalization and the stigmatization they suffer a lot in all those countries. They suffer from the stigma which is attached from working with waste. So policy briefs are a more direct, more popular language directed to an audience which has more influence and more power to make change as well. Next slide. And also we've produced several videos, and here I'm just highlighting the two which were taken in Brazil. And I would highly recommend you, if you get a minute or a couple more minutes, to just listen into those videos. They give you a much better background of the work these people are doing and the innovations they have come up with to make the work better and to also improve their working conditions, etc. Next. So Brazil is actually a special situation, because in Brazil, waste picker organizations have evolved significantly over the past 20 years, let's say. And that is also reflected due to the changes in policy. So you will find significant contributions through policy, opening up spaces for waste pickers and their recognition anchored in specific policy. The next, please. And that brings me already to a small case study, which I would like to share with you, or let's say like a new pilot project, which derived out of the waste management, the waste governance project, and of course other work even previous to that project, which is related to the wish and the demand of waste pickers to be able to access more knowledge, because they know that with knowledge is power, and they just need to have more access to education. And so the idea which is their demand is to create a space, an educational space. We can call it a university, because of the multiple knowledges which are available in universities. But usually universities are not available for waste pickers. And so this would be a space which is specifically dedicated for that population. And our Pedagogy is very much rooted in Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator and pedagogue, who has written several books which are very useful in preparing us for this work. But the key idea is actually really to teach and to make the learning so that it stimulates critical self-consciousness and social awareness, which is the pathway to free them and to emancipate them also against many oppressive forces. So it's a critical understanding which leads to critical action based on Paulo Freire himself. So the next, yeah. So for that project, we have recently, we have started research, first of all, by conceptualizing the idea together with waste pickers and networking with those their organizations and partners. And then we have to find a research project to find out more what their demand is and also how to best meet that demand, which of course follows also very specific research ethics procedure, working with vulnerable population. And the next step then was to design the research tool to find out more about that, how that university should look like and what it should do. So we did design a questionnaire, did some data collection and organized the results. And then I will show that we did mobilize the findings and had a workshop to validate the first findings. Next slide. So the questionnaire, which we applied to waste picker organizations, their leaders, but also members. The questionnaire itself had 4 parts. The first one was more geared towards the individual motivation, their interests, knowledge gaps, and how to share knowledge. The second part focused on the imaginary. What do they envision? How do they envision that space and how this can be constructed collectively, also in terms of a common language, an accessible language, and with a vision for the future in terms of embracing more targets and expanding the reach of that university. The third part was targeted towards just looking at how that educational space should look like and whether we could introduce a hybrid work environment. And the fourth part was specifically related to waste picker leaders, which have maybe a more broader perspective of the members of the waste picker organization in terms of challenges and difficulties in the co-op work, but also looking at the assets which exist within the co-op or other waste picker organizations, forms of organizations. Next slide. So we interviewed 21 participants. We had 21 participants who spoke up for their organizations, and 12 cooperatives were involved and covered. Here you see like a map from the metro region of São Paulo in Brazil, and where those 12 cooperatives were located. The next slide, please. And so our findings, well, just in a nutshell, due to the lack of time, we show that many of the cooperatives they have existed for quite a while, formed before 2004. And then another part of them were formed between 2010 and 16, which was like a highlight in the organization of the waste pickers movement. In terms of education, of course, that population has difficulties in accessing education, public education, that also reflects in having their elementary school incomplete, So that means that even involving that population in higher education requires a specific approach in order to be inclusive and really reach that population. Of course, I think here it confirms that we're talking about a very low income population. Next slide, please. Yeah, I've included that slide just to show that if you look at the last column, which is the production tons month per person, you can see that there's huge variations between those cooperatives. And that very much reflects the level of equipment, the level of training, and organization and internal governance, etc. With being able to sort more per person, which then of course also reflects in a better or worse salary or income per person as well. Next slide. So we asked them about their perception on education and what they would like to study, and if they had information they themselves would like to share. And because we have seen that there is a lot of knowledge which needs to be transferred horizontally amongst them. So the university would also, it would work on a peer-to-peer learning, and also a peer learning with, for example, one academic and one waste picker teaching together a certain subject and involving their knowledge. Next slide. Yeah, the themes, they vary from waste incineration, which is critical in some regions. But then also you see that they are interested in learning more about legislation, power relations, and conflict resolution, etc. Next slide. Well, how they think the university, what the university means, these were the key words which came up. So it's kind of polemic as well. It's a conflicted place. It's a place which has always excluded them, but it's also seen as a place they really would like to access. Next slide. Yeah, and here I think I would just like to read one of their quotes, what a good university would look like. It requires a good professor who is serious, accompanying, supporting the students, and who knows how to put him herself in the situation of the waste pickers, and thus who avoids discrimination and expands inclusion. So next slide. So, and how it should be. Well, we discussed, and I can't go in detail here into the issues which came up, like even issues of, well, should the students get some financial support, because if they are studying, they might be out of, they might not be working at that time and might not be making money. So we should discuss and think about financial support for that. But we also looked into teachers and educators, the qualities they need to bring, and also the environment where this should take place. Thank you. Next one. So, and the specific questions for the co-op leaders, they focused on, yeah, the issue is the human relationships within the cooperative is a big issue, like conflict resolution should be tackled. But also there are other issues which came up, and I think which can be dealt with, and making the work, improving the work environment for all members. Next slide. Yeah, and so other educational activities that would help, according to the leaders, is to learn more about how cooperatives are working, so about cooperativism, But also very basic things came up, like literacy skills and learning more about how to better separate materials to increase the economic benefit from this activity. Next slide. So we did also knowledge mobilization by transferring those findings into an accessible language and preparing a folder, which is, you can see on the side here. And so in that folder, you see some of the research findings with graphics and visuals, which makes it much easier to access that information. And we also disseminated the findings through voice short audio clips on WhatsApp. Next slide. And we held a first workshop, which was about discussing and validating the research results and already defining key areas of learning. And because we don't have so much time, I'm going to skip the detailed results and would like to go straight to, well, we can skip ahead and I say when we're stopping. So yeah. We had group discussions, answering specific questions, and that helped us come up with key issues. Yes, here, thank you. That helped us define key areas which would become the first educational module to be transferred to the waste pickers. So our second workshop, which happened at the end of January, we then discussed, because in the meantime, we have worked on a project proposal, have submitted the project proposal, have not yet gotten the funding, but we're waiting for the result. But we wanted to update everybody about that document, but also then design the content for the first pilot study, because we have a small budget to conduct a first module, so a pilot study. So we had this workshop in January, and next slide. And again, we worked always in a big circle and with writing ideas on papers and sharing those ideas. Next slide. And from that workshop, then we defined the next steps, which is looking into the curriculum of the courses, which had been defined already in the first workshop, and also the first module which came out of this second workshop. Then we will have a small training session to train the educators, then recruit the educators, prepare the training, and then start with the preparation for the delivery of the first module, which will be in April. So next slide. And the project will also have, in terms of its governance, it has the executive council, like the core of the people like who organized the workshops, who are really central in moving everything forward. Then a management council, which is validating and deciding the next steps and the content of the teaching, etc. And a broader advisory council, which meets much less, which we are envisioning this to be international as well, not just from Brazil, but have members, hopefully members such as Bud Hall as one of our advisory council as well. Next slide, please. So here you see the timeline. Well, April, we start with the pilot project, and we are hoping that still this year we will have the first classroom in São Paulo. Next year, we will add another classroom in another very densely populated area here in the metro region of São Paulo. And then the second part of next year, we would also expand to 2 different cities in Brazil. And hopefully 2025, we could go international by making everything hybrid, making the classes hybrid and translated to our colleagues in Kenya, Tanzania, Argentina, and so many other places in the world. Next slide. And this is the core team which has been working through this project and was present in the second workshop as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here for any question, and you can also get my email and send me email questions. I'm happy to engage in talking to all of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Judah. That was a very interesting presentation. It touches on so many areas between the social inclusion and the marginalization, but also models for waste governance and waste disposal and environmental sustainability. So that was fascinating. Thank you for sharing. We had one question come up in the chat already, so I'll invite everyone first. If you do have questions for Judah, please post them in the chat. Take some time to think about this. And in the meantime, there was one question that came in from Christine. At one point, I think when you were talking about the cooperatives, you'd mentioned self-help groups. And Christine was wondering how self-help group is defined. And is this a kind of informal collective?
Exactly. Thank you for the question, Christine. Actually, the self-help group, that came up in the context where we were comparing the work in the different countries. And self-help groups are more present in the African context, in Kenya and Tanzania. And basically, yes, they are informal collectives. Can be women groups who get together and engage in, for example, collecting waste and taking the waste out of a neighborhood and bringing it to the landfill for a small fee. So it's like very grassroots, lifting people into some income and around different themes. Like I just mentioned the theme of a waste-related theme, but there's also self-help groups which organize around money lending, like table banking, which is like very grassroots, people in the neighborhood coming together and setting up a small fund of money where everybody contributes, and one of the member then can use that money to well buy some equipment they need for their entrepreneur or business. So yeah, self-help is very diverse, and my own experience is that it's much more present in the African context, and very, very successful as well. Like in the waste collection area, for example, in Kenya and also in Tanzania, young group of young people get together and have started the business of working in their own neighborhood. So they know many people there and have started to engage with waste, first by collecting waste, but then also by doing voluntary cleanups, just to show the community how valuable it is to take the waste out and how it then reduces pests and other nuisances, and also makes it much safer and a healthier environment.
Right. That's excellent. So we have some, I think, 2 more questions that have come in. Walter has asked, and I think this is in reference to the slides you were sharing about the incomes that waste pickers would make. Are any of these groups tax exempt?
Obrigado. So
de nada.
that was my question, because it was very interesting, and now with the change of politics, you know, and we all know, I'm pretty familiar with the Argentinian side, but you know, between the Argentinian and the Brazilian, culturally, the power relations that I have to deal with politics, it's a big deal. So I was wondering, and as Amanda mentioned, you know, in one of the slides mentioned that there's a literacy problem there. And I'm interested as a teacher, as an EAL teacher, how these cooperatives would deal with or have to face, you know, the literacy issues, deal with the legal health issues, and of course, the power relations.
Thank you so much for your question. Very interesting. Yeah, before answering the question, actually, I need to highlight that in Brazil, and I guess in Argentina, it's probably very similar. Most waste pickers are actually not yet organized, but they work on their own. They work independently and very informally. So they have no benefits, but they also do not pay taxes. But they are highly exploited because they only get what the middleman pays them for the material.
Okay.
So in Brazil, I would say it's about 35% of the waste pickers, they are organized in associations and cooperatives. And even organized, not all of them have what here is called the CNPJ, which is the legal document to be able to sell their materials. And of course, they pay taxes. They are paying taxes as well.
Oh, so they are not tax exempt, because
no,
I was actually adding to that question, to that one. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that is an issue. They have a lot of expenses to maintain the cooperative. And also during COVID, that was the key issue, because during COVID, the government, but also the wider community made a lot of donations, money, but also in kind, etc., to maintain the waste pickers. But nobody thought about maintaining the spaces, the cooperatives. So they had to still pay rent often, or still pay the electricity bill. That's why over COVID, a couple of cooperatives, some cooperatives, they did not survive. That continuity was not guaranteed through any payment. So to run a waste picker organization, which is legally recognized, is quite expensive. And that is a key limitation for many of the cooperatives.
And just a quick observation of that. Do you really think that with Lula returning and so, mindful as he was in the previous two governments towards the vulnerable, do you think this is going to change? Or is going to get a little bit of more support? I don't know. I'm intrigued.
Thank you for that question. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I'm as similar to my colleagues. I'm very hopeful. And the first signs, yes, really.
Yeah.
The first signs are very good. Like January 1st of this year, when Lula took the government, he got the decoration band was handed over by a waste picker, by Aline. She's a famous women leader in a cooperative in Brasilia, in Distrito Federal. And so I think he is very much aware. Yeah. He was already aware before. He had created several official offices in support of waste pickers. And the same is happening right now. In Brazil, as well as in Argentina too, there is a very strong national movement of waste pickers. And the national movement here in Brazil, from day one, is been negotiating with the federal government in terms of occupying leadership positions in the new offices which are being created. And there has been created a secretariat which is exactly focused on inclusive waste governance. So I'm quite hopeful. However, a lot of damage has been done over the past 4 years with Bolsonaro. Let's not
get upset about it.
No.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll move to this question, Judah, and it sounds like you've already answered this, but perhaps in case there's anything you'd like to expand, are there examples of government officials that acknowledge and are helping to uplift waste picker organizations for the employment and environment or health benefits they offer? So you've shared that one government official's kind of perspective, but are there others you would highlight?
Yes, actually, it's also a very good question. And so far I've spoken about the federal level, but a lot of support is actually needed at the local level. Because if there is no local level support, then even the federal funding which might come is not very useful, because you really need to be anchored in the local, in the municipality. And there is the one I mentioned, but there are others who are providing more space to integrate waste picker organizations in selective waste collection and the recycling programs. But there's many different approaches and models to it. The most important is really to anchor it in public policy, to have like a law which states that waste pickers are paid for the amount of materials which are diverted from the landfill into the circular economy. And there are a couple of cities which have such laws, and where the waste pickers are slowly expanding their influence and covering more of the recycling program in their city. But a lot needs to be done still, really.
Yeah. This next question is a question I think we've had for a lot of presenters with CBRCanada lately. This is something we've really been grappling with, this idea of often as community-based researchers, we have to balance our role as a researcher with the potential role we might take as an activist working towards social change. So this question is asking, how do you balance the research with the action or social change initiatives? And is that in any way embedded in the funding for this project?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because often the action and the social change initiative was not part of the project designed when asking for funding, which then means that you kind of have to reallocate funding and research potential into what actually derives out of the interactions with your research partners. And we value that, because I think there's no use to do research just to write a nice publication, but to not really touch on what is relevant for your research partners. So we always have to juggle a little bit. Like with this project, we did not have a lot of funding for the project of the creation of the university for waste pickers. So we used whatever we could get to start, and which allowed us to write a new proposal and hopefully get funding approved for that project. But yeah, it is very tricky, because you don't want to make any promises. But for that reason, I think, and that has always helped us, transparency is really key. To have transparency, and to say that it does not just depend on me. There's a lot that also the partners have to, they are part of this, and that to keep it very open and transparent for people to accompany what is happening and what can happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's certainly a difficult balance, and I think a lot of community-based researchers are facing those challenges of taking on activism work, even creative dissemination or community mobilization strategies, when often our research funding doesn't cover that portion. So, thank you.
Well, maybe to add to that as well, I think for me it has always been quite important to that action part of it. And in previous projects, for example, we have worked on like public policy to make that shift happen in public policy, but also to create more awareness about incineration, waste incineration, which is in conflict with recycling. And so these ideas, they have never been kind of like written into our projects when we submitted the projects for funding, but these issues are so important that they have always kind of like been in the center of our attention. So it's kind of adjusting the research and using the findings also to shed more light on those key issues as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And as a couple of people have said in the chat, this is a very interesting project, very fundamental to make a difference. So thank you for sharing. And
You're
I'll share
welcome.
my screen back up again, just as we close out this final formal portion of our event today before moving into our live discussion. So we hope, of course, that any of you who've joined us here today will stay in touch. Community-Based Research Canada has a newsletter, and Julia is going to share the link to where you can sign up for a newsletter in the chat. That'll help you stay up to date with any upcoming events that we're putting on or new resources coming out, anything like that. And we give a very sincere thank you to everyone who has joined us today, to Judah for presenting, of course, and to anyone from the future who might be watching this recording on our website or through YouTube. So we're now going to stop the recording and move into the informal live discussion portion of our event today.